cowboy encounters an Apache woman washing in the river. Her dress was torn. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the vast landscape with shades of orange and gold. The dusty trail wound its way through rolling hills and scattered trees, each casting long shadows across the ground. A cowboy rode slowly along the path, his horse moving at a steady pace. The rhythmic sound of hooves against the dirt was the only noise in the quiet afternoon, except for the occasional whisper of wind through the grasses. The cowboy, a man in his early 30s, was tall and lean, with a sun-weathered face and eyes that had seen much of the open land. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes from the glaring sun, and his boots were scuffed from many miles on horseback. He carried only the essentials: a worn leather saddlebag, a rifle strapped across his back, and a small canteen of water. Life on the trail was hard, lonely, and often unpredictable, but he had learned to trust in his own skills and instincts. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he noticed something unusual near the river that cut through the valley below. A flash of movement caught his eye, and he instinctively pulled his horse to a slower pace. There, by the edge of the clear, flowing water, was a woman. She knelt at the riverbank, her hands busy washing what appeared to be clothing or blankets in the cool, rippling current. The sunlight glimmered on the water, making it sparkle like 1,000 tiny stars, and her dark hair hung loosely around her shoulders, catching the light as she moved. The cowboy could see that her dress was torn at the hem, ragged from travel or wear, and it spoke of hardship, of journeys taken through rough terrain and uncertain times. He remained still for a moment, unsure whether to approach or simply watch from a distance. There was something about the way she moved, graceful despite the evident fatigue, that drew his attention. He noted the determination in her posture, the careful way she balanced herself on the riverbank, and the quiet focus in her eyes. She seemed aware of the cowboy's presence but chose not to look up, her movements steady and unhurried. The river's gentle current lapped at the rocks and sand, filling the air with a soft, soothing sound. Birds flitted among the nearby trees, calling to one another in short bursts of song. Everything felt peaceful, yet the cowboy sensed an unspoken tension, as if the woman carried more than just clothing in her hands, perhaps memories, worries, or the weight of her journey. He shifted slightly, trying not to make any noise that might startle her. The cowboy had learned long ago that sudden movements could frighten animals, and people were often no different. Respecting someone's space was important, especially in moments of vulnerability. As he watched, he saw the woman scrub a piece of fabric against a smooth stone, the water foaming gently around her fingers. Her hands were strong, calloused from work or life in the wilderness, yet they moved with careful precision. He wondered how far she had traveled, what paths she had crossed, and what had brought her to this lonely stretch of river. The questions circled in his mind, each unanswered, leaving him both curious and cautious. The cowboy dismounted, keeping his horse close but allowing it to graze on the sparse grass near the bank. He tied the reins loosely to a tree branch, ensuring the animal would remain nearby but not wander off. The ground was soft from the river's edge, and his boots sank slightly into the damp earth. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, making sure his movements were calm and non-threatening. The woman finally glanced up, her eyes meeting his for the briefest moment. There was a flicker of wariness in her gaze, quickly replaced by a measured calm. She did not smile, nor did she frown. Her expression was neutral, cautious, and observing. The cowboy nodded slightly in greeting, a simple gesture to convey that he meant no harm. The woman's voice was soft but clear when she spoke. It carried a melodic quality, tinged with a language unfamiliar to the cowboy. He couldn't understand her words, but the tone was not angry or frightened. It was simply cautious, a natural response to a stranger approaching. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, signaling that he could not speak her language but meant no danger. Slowly, she returned to her task, resuming the washing of her clothes in the river, her movements steady and rhythmic once more. The cowboy watched, respecting her need for space while feeling the pull of curiosity. As the sun continued its slow descent, the shadows lengthened and the colors of the sky deepened. The river reflected the fiery hues of the sunset, turning the water into a flowing ribbon of gold and crimson. The cowboy noticed small details he might have missed before: the delicate pattern of a leaf floating downstream, the glint of a stone beneath the water, the gentle ripple as a fish swam by. It was a moment of stillness, of quiet observation, where the world seemed to pause just long enough to allow him to witness another person's life intersecting with his own, if only briefly. He considered speaking, asking if she needed help, but hesitated. The torn dress suggested vulnerability, but approaching too quickly might break the fragile balance of trust. He decided to wait, giving her the choice to acknowledge him on her terms. The woman's movements continued without rush, dipping the fabric into the water, wringing it carefully, and laying it across nearby rocks to dry. Her patience and self-sufficiency impressed him. She did not appear helpless, only careful and resilient. Time passed slowly, marked only by the shifting light and the quiet murmur of the river. The cowboy's presence seemed to become less of an intrusion as she noticed him and accepted it without alarm. He realized that in this vast, untamed land, human encounters were rare and often fleeting. Yet, in this moment, there was a connection, however subtle, a recognition of shared experience in a world that demanded strength, awareness, and courage. The air carried the scent of the river and the surrounding forest, a mix of damp earth, wildflowers, and distant pine. The cowboy breathed it in, feeling a strange sense of peace despite the lingering uncertainty. He knew that life on the trail was full of unpredictability, that each day could bring danger, discovery, or solitude. Yet here, by the river, he felt a quiet reminder that even in the harshest environments, moments of calm, observation, and human connection could still exist. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the landscape, the cowboy stayed still, watching the woman finish her work. He noticed the way her shoulders relaxed as she set the last piece of clothing on the rocks to dry. There was dignity in her actions, a quiet pride in completing a task with care despite the challenges she faced. He felt a growing respect, a silent acknowledgement of her strength and resilience. Though words were scarce and understanding limited, the simple act of witnessing her determination became meaningful in itself. Eventually, the woman stood, brushing the water from her hands. Her movements were deliberate, careful, and full of purpose. She adjusted her torn dress, smoothing it as best she could, and glanced toward the cowboy once more. There was a recognition in her eyes, a silent communication that did not require language. The cowboy nodded again, returning the gesture, and both understood in their own way that this meeting, though brief, carried significance. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees and sending a few stray leaves floating along the river's surface. Shadows grew longer, and the first hints of evening began to appear in the sky. The cowboy mounted his horse slowly, ensuring he did not startle the woman or disturb the calm of the riverbank. As he prepared to ride on, he took one last look at her, committing the scene to memory: the flowing river, the glint of sunlight on the water, the torn dress, and the quiet strength of the woman who had captured his attention. With a gentle nudge, his horse stepped forward, following the trail that wound through the valley and into the unknown. The cowboy's mind lingered on the encounter, thinking about the stories that lay behind every traveler, every face he might meet along the way. He realized that moments like these, however fleeting, were what gave life richness and depth. The river, the sun, the solitude, they had all combined to create a meeting that neither of them would forget, even as their paths would soon diverge. And so, as the evening shadows stretched across the land and the sounds of the wilderness grew softer, the cowboy rode on, carrying with him the quiet memory of a woman by the river, a moment of humanity, resilience, and unspoken connection that would remain etched in his mind for years to come. The cowboy had not gone far when he realized he could not shake the memory of the woman by the river. Her cautious glance, the way she moved, and the quiet determination in her eyes stayed with him. He rode slowly along the dusty trail, letting his horse move at a gentle pace, thinking about the brief encounter and the story that might lie behind her presence there. Life on the trail was often solitary, and it was rare for him to meet someone who stirred both curiosity and respect so deeply. He knew he had to understand her story, even if it meant bridging the distance between their worlds. He turned his horse back toward the river, careful not to rush or disturb the peace that had settled there. The landscape was bathed in the soft light of late afternoon, the golden sun reflecting off the water and illuminating the gentle ripples of the current. As he approached, he could see her still at the riverbank, though now she seemed more alert, as if sensing that someone was returning. The torn fabric of her dress fluttered slightly in the breeze, a subtle reminder of the hardships she had faced on her journey. She glanced toward him, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy dismounted again, this time with a clear intention to communicate. He spoke in a calm, gentle voice, choosing words slowly. "Are you all right?" he asked, knowing that she might not understand his language fully. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him carefully. Then, with a soft, deliberate gesture, she indicated that she was fine. Though her words were foreign, the tone carried meaning, caution mixed with the faintest hint of curiosity. The cowboy nodded, understanding that this was an invitation to proceed carefully, without pressure or intrusion. He stepped closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. The woman resumed her task of washing clothes in the river, her hands moving skillfully, scrubbing each piece with care. There was a rhythm to her work, almost meditative, as if the water itself helped wash away more than just dirt. The cowboy watched, fascinated by her diligence and composure. He knew that survival in the wilderness required not only skill but also patience and courage, and this woman possessed all three in abundance. He admired the way she handled herself, and he felt a quiet determination to show that he could be trusted. After a few moments of silence, he reached into his saddlebag and carefully removed a small bundle of bread and dried meat. He held it out toward her, speaking gently. "Food," he said, hoping the meaning would be clear. The woman paused, looking at the offering with a mixture of surprise and hesitation. She studied him closely, weighing his intentions. Finally, she nodded slightly, indicating that she would accept it. The cowboy placed the bundle on a flat rock nearby, stepping back to give her space. She approached cautiously, taking a small piece of bread in her hands and examining it before eating. The act of sharing food broke the initial tension between them. The woman's expression softened, and for the first time she looked at the cowboy without wariness. He smiled faintly, understanding that trust was being built, slowly and carefully. The river flowed between them like a silent witness, carrying away any lingering doubts. Around them, the world seemed to pause, as if the wilderness itself recognized the importance of this fragile connection. Once she had eaten, the woman returned to washing the clothes, but now her movements carried a subtle ease, a recognition that the cowboy posed no threat. The cowboy, in turn, sat on a nearby rock, resting and observing. He noticed small details about her presence, the careful way she balanced on the riverbank, the way her fingers moved deftly through the water, and the quiet strength in her posture. Each detail spoke of resilience, of a life lived in constant awareness and vigilance. He felt a growing respect, mixed with a desire to understand her story more fully. He tried again to communicate, speaking slowly and using gestures to indicate curiosity rather than intrusion. He pointed to her dress, then to himself, then back to the river, hoping to convey that he understood the hardships of travel and the need for safety. The woman watched him carefully, then nodded in acknowledgement. Though they did not speak the same language, a silent understanding began to form. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes, intention, patience, and observation were enough to build trust. The river flowed gently between them, carrying a soft murmur that seemed to echo the unspoken conversation. Birds sang in the trees nearby, and the sun cast long shadows across the water. The cowboy realized that moments like these were rare, opportunities to witness courage and resilience firsthand. He thought about the countless miles he had traveled alone, the nights spent under the stars, and the dangers he had faced. Yet in this encounter, he felt a connection that transcended the isolation of the trail. As the afternoon wore on, the woman paused in her washing, standing and stretching slightly. Her dress, though torn, now looked more secure, and she moved with careful deliberation. The cowboy offered a nod of approval, recognizing her strength and independence. She responded with a subtle smile, a small gesture that carried more meaning than words could convey. For both of them, this exchange was a bridge between two very different lives, a moment of mutual respect and understanding. The cowboy reached into his bag again, this time producing a small canteen of water. He gestured toward her, offering a drink. The woman looked at the canteen, then back at him, and finally accepted it, taking a careful sip. The simple act of sharing water further strengthened the bond forming between them. Each small gesture, the bread, the water, the patient observation, created a foundation of trust that neither of them had expected when the day began. Time moved slowly, marked by the shifting light and the gentle sounds of the river. The cowboy and the woman sat together on the riverbank, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet connected by the shared experience of the moment. He thought about the challenges she must have faced, traveling alone through dangerous terrain, navigating the uncertainties of the wilderness. She, in turn, seemed to recognize his own resilience, the quiet strength required to survive life on the trail. Though they spoke little, the unspoken communication between them was profound. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the river in shades of gold and crimson, the cowboy and the woman finally began to exchange more deliberate gestures. He pointed to the river, then to the horizon, indicating direction. She nodded, understanding that he was curious about her journey. She responded with a series of gestures, indicating that she had traveled far and faced many challenges. Though the conversation was limited to gestures and expressions, each movement carried meaning, revealing fragments of her story. The cowboy listened intently, observing her expressions and actions. He sensed the hardships she had endured, the determination that had carried her this far. He also recognized the pride in her movements, the quiet dignity with which she faced the difficulties of life on the trail. Each gesture was a window into her character, and he felt privileged to witness it firsthand. The river, the sun, and the surrounding wilderness provided a backdrop that made the moment even more vivid, a scene of quiet resilience and human connection. As the afternoon turned toward evening, the cowboy realized that he had spent hours with the woman, yet only a small portion of her story had been revealed. He felt a growing sense of respect, mixed with admiration and curiosity. He knew that this encounter, brief as it might be, would remain with him for a long time. He also understood that the woman, too, had recognized his intentions, and that trust had been established, fragile but real. Finally, the woman stood fully, adjusting her torn dress with care. She looked at the cowboy, and he returned her gaze. There was a shared acknowledgement in that look, a silent promise of mutual respect and understanding. Neither spoke, yet both felt the weight of the connection they had forged. Around them, the river continued to flow, the birds sang, and the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. It was a moment suspended in time, where two very different lives intersected briefly, leaving an indelible mark on both. The cowboy gathered his belongings, preparing to continue his journey, but he lingered for a moment longer, taking in the scene. He knew that the memory of this encounter would stay with him, shaping his understanding of resilience, courage, and human connection. The woman returned to her task, her movements steady, yet now there was a subtle ease to her actions, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust that had been established. As the sun began to disappear behind the distant hills, the cowboy mounted his horse and prepared to leave. He gave a final nod to the woman, who returned the gesture with a faint smile. The trail ahead was long and uncertain, but he carried with him the memory of a day spent by the river, witnessing strength, courage, and the quiet dignity of a woman who had faced life's challenges head-on. And though their paths would soon diverge, the connection they had shared would remain, a silent testament to the power of patience, respect, and human understanding. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden rays across the valley, when the cowboy realized that the woman was moving closer to the center of the river. Her hands worked quickly, but with care, as she tried to manage a larger piece of cloth that had caught on a submerged branch. The current was gentle but steady, and the water swirled around her ankles as she leaned over to free the fabric. The cowboy's heart tightened at the sight. He knew that even a small slip could be dangerous, and he felt a sudden need to act, but he reminded himself to approach carefully without startling her. He stepped closer, his boots pressing into the damp soil of the riverbank. The woman paused, her eyes lifting to meet his. There was a flicker of concern in her expression, and the cowboy nodded reassuringly, letting her know he meant no harm. Then, with measured steps, he moved closer, his hand extended as if to help without invading her space. She hesitated for a moment, studying his face, weighing his intentions. Finally, she took a small step back to steady herself, but the fabric remained caught, and the water tugged gently at her legs. "Careful," the cowboy said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. He extended his hand again, this time closer to her, and gestured toward the fabric. She hesitated, then slowly accepted his help. With a gentle pull, he freed the cloth from the branch. The woman let out a soft sigh of relief, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she regained her balance. For a moment, the river was silent except for the soft murmur of the current and the distant call of a bird. The act of assistance, though simple, broke through some of the remaining tension between them. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity, her dark eyes reflecting both caution and a growing sense of trust. The cowboy smiled faintly, knowing that small gestures often carried more weight than words. He stepped back slightly, giving her room to regain her composure, and she adjusted her dress carefully, securing it as best she could. The torn fabric now seemed less significant, patched temporarily by her careful hands, a testament to her resilience and resourcefulness. Once she was steady, the woman gestured toward the river, then to herself, indicating that she was unharmed. The cowboy nodded, understanding her silent message, and offered a small, reassuring smile. There was an unspoken agreement between them now. They would act cautiously, with patience and respect, and no unnecessary risks would be taken. The river, flowing steadily around their feet, seemed almost to acknowledge this agreement, its gentle ripples mirroring the fragile trust forming between two very different lives. The cowboy decided to remain by the river, sitting on a nearby rock and observing her carefully. He could see the strength in her movements, the way she maintained balance and control despite the uncertain footing. Her hands worked skillfully, rinsing and wringing the fabric, and he noted the care with which she treated each piece. Even in the midst of potential danger, she did not panic or rush. Instead, she met each challenge with quiet determination. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her resilience and self-reliance. After a while, he noticed her glance toward the horizon, as if measuring the distance to some unseen destination. He followed her gaze and realized that the valley stretched far beyond the river, dotted with hills, trees, and the occasional rocky outcrop. The landscape was beautiful but unforgiving, and he understood the courage it must take to navigate it alone. He had traveled this land for years, and yet he knew that even he would hesitate to face its challenges without preparation. She, however, moved with a confidence born of necessity, an innate awareness of her surroundings and the dangers that might arise. The cowboy spoke softly again, hoping to communicate reassurance. "You're safe," he said, pointing toward the riverbank and then to himself. The woman studied him, her gaze thoughtful and cautious. Then, slowly, she nodded, acknowledging his words and the meaning behind them. It was a small gesture, but it carried profound significance. Trust, once earned, was a rare and valuable thing in the wilderness, and the cowboy felt that this moment was an important step in the bond they were forming. As the afternoon continued to fade, the woman began to move back toward the riverbank, carefully carrying the cleaned fabric. She laid it across smooth rocks to dry, arranging each piece with deliberate care. The cowboy watched, noting the methodical precision in her actions. Each movement revealed a life shaped by survival, responsibility, and attention to detail. He realized that she had faced countless challenges to reach this point, and yet she handled each with quiet dignity. He felt inspired by her perseverance and determined to show that he respected her independence. Suddenly, a light breeze stirred, causing one of the drying fabrics to slip from the rocks and float toward the current. The woman moved quickly to retrieve it, but the water had already begun to carry it downstream. The cowboy reacted instinctively, stepping closer and reaching out to catch the fabric before it was lost. He grasped it firmly and handed it back to her. She looked at him, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. The simple act, repeated yet meaningful, reinforced the fragile trust that was building between them. They both paused for a moment, standing near the riverbank, observing the flow of water and the changing light as the sun dipped lower. The sky was painted in warm hues of orange and pink, reflecting off the river like a ribbon of fire. The cowboy took a slow breath, appreciating the serenity of the scene, while the woman adjusted her dress once more, ensuring that it was secure. Though their interaction had been brief, it had already left a lasting impression on both. The river, the sunlight, and the quiet landscape created a backdrop for a meeting that neither of them would soon forget. As evening approached, the woman gathered the last of the cleaned fabric and began to fold it carefully. She moved with purpose, her actions deliberate and precise, demonstrating the skill and patience required for survival in a world that offered little comfort. The cowboy remained nearby, observing without intrusion, offering a silent acknowledgement of her abilities. Each gesture, each careful movement, strengthened the unspoken bond between them. The woman finally paused, standing upright and brushing the water from her hands. She looked at the cowboy, and he returned her gaze, sensing an understanding that transcended language. He extended a hand once more, this time not to assist but to offer reassurance. She studied it for a moment, then gave a small nod signaling acceptance. The gesture, simple yet profound, marked a turning point in their interaction. Mutual respect had been established, fragile but real, built through patience, observation, and shared experience. As twilight settled over the valley, the sounds of the wilderness grew softer. Birds returned to their nests, the river's current slowed slightly, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and earth. The cowboy and the woman stood near the riverbank, each absorbed in their own thoughts yet connected by the shared experience of the day. He considered the path that lay ahead, the miles of trail yet to be traveled, and the challenges that awaited him. She, too, seemed to reflect on her journey, her eyes distant yet aware of his presence. The cowboy reached into his saddlebag once more, producing a small canteen of water. He offered it to her again, and she accepted with a nod, taking a careful sip. Each shared action, however small, deepened the connection between them. They did not speak the same language, yet communication had occurred through gestures, expressions, and mutual understanding. It was a reminder that trust and respect could exist even in the absence of words. Finally, the woman looked toward the horizon, signaling that it was time to move on. The cowboy understood and nodded, acknowledging her decision. They had shared a meaningful moment, faced a small but significant challenge, and built a foundation of trust that would shape the rest of their encounter. The river flowed quietly between them, the water catching the last rays of sunlight, as if reflecting the bond that had been formed. As the sky deepened into shades of pink and purple, the cowboy mounted his horse once more. He paused to take one last look at the woman by the river, her dark hair catching the fading light, her dress patched but secure, her presence calm and dignified. He felt a deep respect for her strength, resilience, and courage. Though their paths would soon diverge, the memory of this day, of the shared challenge and the silent communication, would remain with him. The woman watched him ride away, her eyes following the slow rhythm of his horse as it moved along the trail. She felt a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they had shared, a silent understanding that the encounter had left an impact on both of them. The river continued to flow, the wilderness around them peaceful and indifferent to human lives, yet it had borne witness to a moment of trust, courage, and mutual respect. As darkness settled over the valley, the cowboy continued down the trail, carrying the memory of the woman by the river, her determination and dignity etched into his mind. He knew that the encounter, brief as it had been, had changed his perspective on the world and the people who inhabit it. And in the quiet of the evening, he could still see her standing at the riverbank, a symbol of resilience, strength, and the unexpected connections that life sometimes offers. As the evening deepened, the sky painted itself in rich shades of orange, pink, and violet. The river reflected the colors, flowing silently but steadily, like a mirror to the world above. The cowboy remained near the woman, sitting on a smooth rock at the riverbank. He had realized that the long day and the small challenge they had faced together had created a bridge between them. There was no rush, no need to speak immediately. The silence itself seemed meaningful, a moment of peace and understanding in a world that rarely offered either. The woman watched the flowing water, her hands folded in her lap. Her dark hair caught the fading light, shimmering softly as a breeze moved through it. She glanced at the cowboy from time to time, her eyes curious yet calm. He returned her gaze with the same patience and respect he had shown all day. Though they spoke different languages, a dialogue was forming in gestures, expressions, and shared experience. Each movement, each glance carried meaning. They were learning to understand each other without words. The cowboy reached into his bag and pulled out a small bundle of dried meat and bread. He placed it on the rock between them and nodded toward her, indicating that she could take some if she wished. She studied it carefully, her dark eyes reflecting the orange glow of the sunset. Then she slowly took a small piece, breaking it apart with her hands and eating with deliberate care. He watched quietly, giving her the space she needed. The act of sharing food was more than survival. It was a silent communication, a gesture of trust. After a moment, the cowboy tried again to communicate with words, speaking slowly and pointing to himself. "My name, John," he said, pronouncing it clearly. The woman's eyes lit up slightly as she considered the sound. Then she pointed to herself and whispered a word he did not understand. He nodded, as if he had understood, though he had only accepted the fact that her name, whatever it was as important as his own. It was a small moment, yet it marked a step further in the bridge between them. Names were powerful. They represented identity, trust, and acknowledgement. He gestured toward the river and then to the horizon, trying to indicate that he wanted to understand her journey. The woman's gaze shifted toward the distant hills, then back at him. Slowly, she used her hands to show the path she had traveled, moving through forests, crossing rivers, climbing hills. She pointed to the sun, then to herself, then toward the riverbank, suggesting the length of her journey and the hardships she had faced. The cowboy listened intently, absorbing each gesture and expression, realizing that even without words, a story was being told. The woman paused to rest, brushing her hair back from her face. The cowboy could see the signs of fatigue, slight stiffness in her shoulders, the way she stretched her legs, the careful, deliberate steps she took along the riverbank. Yet even in her exhaustion, there was a quiet strength and dignity in her posture. He admired her resilience, knowing that life in the wilderness demanded both courage and endurance. He thought of his own journey on the trail, and he realized that despite their different paths, there were similarities: long days, loneliness, and the constant need for awareness. The cowboy spoke softly again, pointing to the river and then to himself, trying to convey a sense of shared experience. "I travel alone," he said, emphasizing the word alone with a slow nod. The woman's expression softened slightly, her dark eyes reflecting understanding. She made a small gesture with her hand, touching her chest and then extending her arm toward the horizon, as if to say she too had traveled far, often alone. There was an unspoken recognition of shared endurance, a silent acknowledgement that hardship and survival could connect even the most unlikely people. He reached into his bag once more and offered her a small water flask, holding it out gently. She took it with both hands, drinking slowly and thoughtfully. Then she handed it back, nodding in gratitude. The gesture was simple, yet it reinforced their growing trust. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, created a bond that words alone could not achieve. The cowboy realized that in this moment, they were learning to rely on one another, even if only temporarily, in a world that rarely allowed such moments of mutual understanding. The sun continued to sink lower in the sky, and shadows began to lengthen across the valley. The cowboy pointed toward the distant hills, then to her, trying to indicate curiosity about the land she had passed. She smiled faintly, a soft expression that lit her features, and began to use gestures to tell more of her story. She mimed walking, climbing, and resting, showing the physical challenges she had faced. She pointed to her dress, then to her hands, suggesting wear and hard work. Each gesture painted a vivid picture of life on the trail, and the cowboy followed closely, imagining the landscape she had crossed, the obstacles she had overcome. He felt a growing admiration for her courage and independence. She had faced danger, loneliness, and uncertainty, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. The cowboy realized that her story, though unspoken, was one of perseverance and resourcefulness. She had survived where others might have faltered, relying on her instincts, her skills, and her determination. And now, in this shared space by the river, he was witnessing her resilience firsthand. The river flowed quietly between them, reflecting the colors of the fading sunset. Birds called softly in the distance, and the breeze carried the scent of earth and pine. The cowboy and the woman continued to communicate through gestures, small expressions, and shared understanding. He gestured toward the sky, then to her, as if to ask where she was headed next. She mimed walking again, pointing to distant hills, suggesting a path that was still unknown and challenging. He nodded, acknowledging her determination to continue her journey despite the difficulties. As darkness crept across the valley, the cowboy reached into his bag and pulled out a small cloth, offering it to her to sit on as the ground grew cooler. She hesitated, then accepted it, placing it on the riverbank and sitting down gracefully. He did the same, and for the first time they sat together in companionable silence, side by side but still respectful of each other's space. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the river became more pronounced, a gentle backdrop to the quiet connection forming between them. The woman glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. She pointed to her eyes, then to his, and made a gesture toward her heart. The cowboy understood that she was sharing something personal, perhaps a sense of trust, perhaps an acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. He nodded slowly, pointing to his own chest and then raising a hand slightly, signaling that he understood. Though language failed them, their actions spoke volumes. There was a growing sense of connection, an understanding that their meeting was meaningful and rare. Time seemed to stretch in the fading light. The cowboy and the woman continued to share gestures, small signs, and unspoken communication. She mimed family, then pointed to the sky, suggesting people or places she had left behind. He nodded with empathy, sensing the weight of her journey and the sacrifices she must have made. Though they were strangers, there was a deep understanding emerging, a recognition of shared human experience and the universal challenges of life on the road. Finally, as the stars began to appear in the deepening sky, the woman stood and gestured toward the trail, signaling that it was time to move on. The cowboy understood and rose as well, helping her fold the cloth she had used and gathering his own belongings. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a shared respect for the journey each had undertaken and for the time they had spent together. Though their paths would soon diverge, the memory of this evening of shared stories and mutual understanding would remain with them both. The cowboy mounted his horse, pausing to give a final nod. The woman returned the gesture with a faint smile, her eyes reflecting the last light of the sun and a quiet pride in her independence. The river flowed steadily between them, the sound of water mingling with the gentle rustle of trees and the distant calls of nocturnal birds. It was a moment of connection, of human understanding, that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. As he rode along the trail, the cowboy carried with him the memory of her gestures, her expressions, and the courage that had allowed her to face life's challenges. He knew that encounters like this were rare and valuable, reminders that even in a harsh, unforgiving world, moments of trust, understanding, and shared humanity could exist. And as the riverbank disappeared behind him, he felt a quiet gratitude for the brief but meaningful connection they had forged, a bond formed not with words alone, but with patience, respect, and a shared recognition of courage. The sky was now a deep navy, dotted with stars that twinkled like tiny lamps over the quiet valley. The river reflected their faint light, flowing steadily as though carrying the memory of the day. The cowboy sat on a rock near the riverbank, watching the woman as she carefully packed the fabric she had washed and folded it neatly. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and graceful, reflecting both her skill and the care she always took in her daily tasks. She paused for a moment, looking toward the river, then glanced at him, her expression thoughtful and calm. The cowboy rose slowly from the rock, dusting off his pants and gathering his belongings. He had learned much from the day's encounter, more than words could express. The woman had shown strength, courage, and resilience in ways that inspired him deeply. He felt a quiet respect for her, a recognition of the life she had led and the hardships she had endured. Though their time together had been brief, the impact was profound, leaving an impression on both of them that would endure far beyond the fading light of evening. He approached her cautiously, offering a small gesture, a nod combined with a gentle smile, to convey that he had no intention of intruding but wished to acknowledge the bond they had formed. The woman returned the gesture with a soft smile, a silent acknowledgement that she, too, valued the connection they had shared. Words were unnecessary. The quiet understanding between them was sufficient. In that moment, the wilderness seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a rare and delicate moment of trust, respect, and human connection. The cowboy extended a hand once more, not for assistance but as a simple offering of farewell and goodwill. The woman regarded it thoughtfully, then nodded and gave a small, graceful bow. Her dark eyes, reflecting the starlight, seemed to convey gratitude, recognition, and mutual respect. He understood that this was their way of saying goodbye, acknowledging the shared experience without the need for spoken language. The river flowed gently between them, carrying the sound of their silent farewell downstream, merging it with the endless rhythm of nature. For a long moment, they stood in silence, observing each other and the world around them. The cowboy noticed the way the night had transformed the landscape, the river glittering under the moonlight, the trees swaying gently in the cool evening breeze, and the distant hills shrouded in shadow. He realized that this moment, fleeting as it was, would stay with him forever, a memory of trust, courage, and the unexpected intersections of human lives. The woman, too, seemed aware of the significance of their parting, her movements careful and measured, as if wishing to preserve the dignity of the encounter. The cowboy mounted his horse slowly, ensuring that neither of them felt rushed or pressured. He adjusted the reins and gave a gentle nudge, and the horse stepped forward onto the trail, its hooves crunching softly on the gravel. He turned his gaze toward the woman once more. She stood at the riverbank, her posture tall and composed, the folds of her patched dress catching the faint moonlight. Her eyes followed him as he began to move along the trail, a silent witness to the journey that would now take him away from her. As he rode, he felt a mixture of emotions: gratitude for the connection they had shared, admiration for her strength, and a gentle sadness at the impending separation. Yet he understood that this was a part of life on the trail, encounters that were meaningful yet fleeting, moments of connection that left lasting impressions without binding either party. He reflected on the gestures, the shared understanding, and the small acts of kindness that had defined their meeting. Each of these moments, he realized, had been more powerful than any words could have been. The woman watched him go until the trail bent around a small hill and he disappeared from view. She remained by the river for a while longer, listening to the flow of the water and feeling the gentle night breeze against her face. The encounter had left her with a quiet sense of reassurance, a confirmation that even in a vast and challenging world, there were moments of trust and mutual respect that transcended language and culture. She folded the last piece of fabric carefully, tucked it away, and prepared to continue her journey along the riverbank, strengthened by the connection she had made with the cowboy. As the night deepened, the sounds of the wilderness grew more pronounced. Crickets sang in unison, the river murmured softly, and the occasional hoot of an owl echoed through the valley. The cowboy moved steadily along the trail, his mind replaying the events of the day: the first sight of her washing clothes, the torn dress, the brief challenge at the river, and the long moments of silent communication. Each memory was vivid, etched into his mind with the clarity that only profound experiences can create. He knew that these images would accompany him for many miles to come, shaping the way he thought about trust, resilience, and human connection. The cowboy's thoughts wandered to the hardships the woman must have endured, the long journey across rough terrain, the solitude of traveling alone, and the constant need to be aware of the dangers around her. He admired her determination and resourcefulness, realizing that life had taught her lessons that few could understand without living them firsthand. At the same time, he reflected on his own life on the trail, the solitude, the challenges, and the constant need for vigilance. Though their experiences were different, he recognized the shared thread of resilience that connected them. Meanwhile, the woman prepared to leave the riverbank. She adjusted her dress, secured her belongings, and took a moment to look back at the water flowing steadily behind her. The river had been a witness to their meeting, a silent companion to the events that had unfolded. She felt a quiet sense of completion, knowing that their encounter had been meaningful and that both of them would carry the memory forward in their own ways. With a determined breath, she stepped forward onto the path that led away from the river, ready to continue her journey. The cowboy paused briefly at a small rise in the trail, looking back one final time toward the river. Though he could no longer see her, he felt her presence in his memory, in the quiet understanding that had formed between them. He realized that their meeting had left him with a new perspective, a reminder that even brief interactions could carry profound meaning, shaping thoughts, emotions, and perceptions long after the moment had passed. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the scents of the river, pine, and earth, and he felt a sense of calm and gratitude. As he continued along the trail, he reflected on the day's events, the small challenges, the shared gestures, the moments of understanding, and the silent communication that had defined their encounter. Each event had been a step in building trust, respect, and a fragile yet meaningful bond. He thought about the courage it took for both of them to navigate the wilderness, to face the unknown, and to engage with one another despite differences in language and culture. The experience had been enriching, leaving him with lessons about patience, empathy, and the power of human connection. The woman, moving steadily along the riverbank, felt similarly reflective. She recalled the cowboy's careful gestures, his patience, and the quiet reassurance he had offered. Though he had been a stranger, his presence had been comforting in a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. She felt a sense of gratitude for the encounter, recognizing the rare opportunity to connect with someone who approached her with respect and understanding. Each step she took along her journey was lighter, strengthened by the memory of the cowboy and the shared experience by the river. The night grew darker, and the stars above seemed to shine more brightly. The cowboy and the woman, though separated by distance, each carried the memory of the other with them. The encounter had created a bridge between two lives, a connection that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. It was a reminder that even in a vast and challenging world, moments of trust, courage, and human understanding could exist. These moments, fleeting yet profound, were the threads that wove meaning into the tapestry of life. As the cowboy rode into the night, he thought of the woman's resilience, her quiet strength, and the dignity with which she faced life's challenges. He realized that the encounter had left him not only with a memory, but with a sense of admiration and inspiration. It reminded him that every person carried stories of courage, endurance, and determination, stories that could be glimpsed if one approached with patience, respect, and an open heart. The night air was filled with the soft sounds of nature, and he felt a sense of peace knowing that their paths had crossed, even briefly, in a way that would leave a lasting mark on both of their lives. The woman, walking steadily along the riverbank, paused once to glance back at the place where the cowboy had been. The river flowed silently, carrying the memory of their meeting downstream, merging it with the endless rhythm of the wilderness. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that their encounter had been meaningful and respectful. Though their paths would not converge again, the lessons, trust, and understanding they had shared would remain with her, strengthening her as she continued her journey. The cowboy and the woman moved forward separately, each carrying the memory of the encounter with them. The trail ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, yet both felt a quiet reassurance. They had met in a moment of vulnerability, shared understanding, and mutual respect. That connection, though brief, had left an indelible mark, a reminder of the strength of human empathy and the power of patience, courage, and trust. The night deepened further, and the river reflected the faint glow of the moon. Both the cowboy and the woman continued their respective paths, strengthened by the memory of one another. Though the wilderness around them was vast and indifferent, their encounter had proven that even in the most unlikely circumstances, moments of human connection could flourish. These moments would carry them forward, each step infused with the quiet knowledge that they had shared something rare, meaningful, and enduring. As the stars shone brightly overhead, the cowboy felt a quiet smile touch his lips. The memory of the woman by the river, her courage, her dignity, and her quiet strength would remain with him forever. And the woman, moving steadily along the riverbank, carried with her the same memory. The cowboy's kindness, patience, and understanding, leaving a lasting impression on her journey through the wilderness. In their separation, both felt the enduring impact of a fleeting, yet profoundly human encounter.